Martyn, welcome to Delve.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So I wonder if you could just kick us off with a short history of you. You can go back as early as you like.
Okay. Maybe from studying, started with product design engineering and then software and systems as a master's.
Yeah.
First job was in Glasgow. So I studied in Glasgow and stayed there for my first job as an IT consultant at Unisys. And then I did a couple of years in a software house. Mm-hmm. So this just really hands-on software engineer. And from there, then moved to London. So this was around 2004.
Yeah.
So big move from Glasgow to London.
How did you find that?
At that time and at that age, that was like, it was formative, big moment.
Yeah.
Despite not so far, a few hours drive, but completely different environment and landscape for working. You know, I went from a small software house to working in central government. So it's still a software engineer. So big, you know, completely different size of teams and, you know, different subject matter. And, you know, the experience there, where I did this for a number of years, worked on the census project, some judicial projects and some police-based projects. And I mean, that's a long time ago. It was a time when largely the development teams were abstracted from really who they served or like what the core purposes or objectives were of these initiatives.
Yeah.
This is way before like gov.uk.
Right.
So
That really,
that's what
I was thinking that year-wise, that's really early days.
Yeah.
In a modern sense of web and applications and everything we know and love today.
Yeah, because I think now central government projects are quite renowned in a lot of ways. Like gov.uk, like, you know, a UX designer would really use that as a reference for a successful delivery because it was user-centric.
Yeah.
Back when I was working on those projects, it was really abstracted from the end users. So to have a bit more autonomy on it and to be at least have more influence, then started a technical consultancy.
Yeah.
So really working on the same projects, but, you know, just with assembling some like-minded engineers.
Yeah.
And this in turn sort of moved away from central government to just corporations in London. And I think this did this for about 6 years.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed living in London, but it's a heavily densely populated
I've
city.
noticed.
Yeah. And I like living in cities, but the appeal of a city that was less densely populated and, you know, married with the fact that Berlin's got such a good reputation for like arts and culture and lifestyle, this, I guess, was the catalyst for change. And so I moved in 2011.
Arguably, that's even bigger than moving from Glasgow to London, or just as big.
It was certainly a big change. You know, the cost of living, the dynamics of like everyday life and working life was completely different, like wholesale change. Yeah. And obviously the language and everything that was about.
Why Berlin at that time?
I think it offered the continuity of living in a city, but the things that it was famous for, which it's still, you know, renowned for today, really like was the appeal for a lifestyle change, I think, first and foremost.
Yeah, it's a super cosmopolitan city, and obviously we're enjoying recording this today, sat in Berlin. Yeah. Brilliant. So what about, tell me how things went after that.
So I think at the beginning, I was really working remotely for those UK projects, still with this technical consultancy model, but embracing and trying to get involved in what was happening here. And this, you know, 2011 was before the tech scene really arrived here.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the experiences were around like innovators or technologists or creatives getting together just on the basis of the energy or the passion that they would have for a particular idea or experiment. And this was really before co-working was, you know, as mature as it is now. Yeah. So it was really an exciting time. It was a really formative time, you know, and I think I really got the benefit of being in amongst those communities to take part in some of those projects.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I think the things did change and things did evolve, and I would say a lot of that was inspired and supported by the city. You know, they put in funding and they created an ecosystem that turned those experiments and turned those initiatives that were just really small projects into like business projects and like startup projects, and this brought the investment eventually.
That's really cool. And is that why you ended up extending from yourself into a team and then start to look at local customers?
I would say so. I think the big change for me, or the sort of the pivot, was basically the amount of startups that emerged. So around 2015, there was apparently every 20 minutes a new startup was born in the city.
That's incredible.
And it had the most venture capital investment at the time, and compared to anywhere else in Europe. So there's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of things going on. But in the innovation space or the startup space, it's about products. It's about multidisciplinary teams. It's not just a engineering or a software development topic or need. It's much more holistic. So that for me that was a big moment, because then I realized that I could find the right people and the right teams, assemble them together. And this was really the beginnings of the second company that I formed, Squareball, in Germany.
Brilliant. And here we are today. So I think this is, that model ran since 2018, since we formed, and served a lot of small innovations, helping founders or incubators go from concept to launch. And over the period of this journey, I think we also started to really consolidate and specialize our architecture choices, our design choices, and this specifically was in the identity space. We started to really lean into identity as a service. Interesting. Now, I think in the center of this, the reason we decided to put this episode together was we specialize in cybersecurity, and cybersecurity secures lots of things. Applications are at the center of the infrastructure world, and people are at the center of the entire IT world. And so the fact that you specialize in developing one and enabling the other I think, leads into a really interesting discussion. And so when we think about the applications that we use and that you build, can you talk a bit about what it takes to build something for someone? A customer comes to you with an idea or a brief. Is it easy? Do you just hire a couple of people? And people talk about developers all the time in this kind of loose, generic sense. Is it easy? It's just having a couple of developers? Or is there a whole load of other things that you go on? And I realize that's a very loaded question, and you're going to explain to me that I'm completely wrong.
I think it's a good question. I think because a lot of the times the response can be a technology-based response to a problem to solve, whereas really everyone should orient and focus on the problem itself. And if you have that mindset to really embrace and evangelize the problem, then you need a team that's not just software engineers or architects. You need product managers, you need creatives, designers, UX researchers. All of this sort of resourcing model, I think, is really the backbone of what we would just call a product team. And I think this, so we start with that as a foundation. I wouldn't say we are super rigid or completely committed to this trio model that Spotify made famous, with the product manager.
Explain what Spotify made famous.
They really just did a good job of promoting and elevating the benefit of a designer, a engineer, and a product manager working as a trio. So very tight-knit team, and no real need to scale that team for quite a long time. This really is down to the processes and the mechanisms in which those three individuals work. So I think we've really aligned with that over the years, and I would say probably being a bit more flexible, depending on the collaboration. Maybe there's some of that resource on the customer side, but for us, I think that product team offer is really best described as that type of configuration.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you mentioned we do a lot of debunking of IT jargon on the podcast just to help the listeners get well. And there was only one, which was UX. Now, UX stands for user experience, and then UI stands for user interface. And when we actually look at the plain English that describes those two things, UX is all about the research process and learning and understanding the brief, the customer.
not just the customer, but the customer that they're looking to serve, whether that's an internal enterprise IT user or it's an external consumer to the organization. And then UI is how somebody designs the thing that the end customer is engaging with. So that was just me just diving in just to debunk and I highlight what UX means. If we take a look at the shape of the team, I know you very well, and I know that you are a very empathetic person. And working with and creating an environment that all the people you employ thrive in also really peels through into the way in which you approach projects. So that whole group or team of people that you employ, starting with UX, really leads from that position of understanding. I wonder if you could just talk a bit more about how that might come together in your project methodology sense, how that comes together.
I would say that product team model, UX designer included, I think as long as there is a consensus or alignment on product thinking, they've been really able to empathize and comprehend the value proposition, like the why, who we serve. Mm-hmm. These are, I would say, really good tenets to begin with. But then to go into the detail, it's about living and breathing what the business owner or the founder or the product owner, what it is that they're trying to achieve, and the difficulties and the pain points and everything that goes with running a startup or trying to deliver something from concept to launch. I think that if that's built into the team and that's built into your UX process, then you're already in a very solid direction, because that means you're as in-house feeling as an agency can be.
Now, I want to focus on this for a minute, because if I go to the selling world, so IT solutions selling, solution selling was introduced 10, 12 years ago. And it was really just a way of less hard selling. And it's all designed to listen to the customer. But really, it's listening with bated breath so that you can then pitch the product that you want to sell them to fix whatever problem they've got. Mm-hmm. Now, working with you and the team for the past 6 to 9 months has shown me a totally different level of listening and understanding. Because, of course, you're developing something for them that's going to be transformative for their business in some shape or form. So I wonder if you could just kind of dig in a bit more into just the project methodology. And of course, project methodology is just a grand way of saying how you approach delivering something to the customer, mm-hmm. and how you demonstrate those listening skills and check-ins.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think listening is a key word. I think that really is like the most important skill when we talk about communication. But to try and package that up into a methodology, if it's not too grand a word, and really conduct it in a way that's compelling for everyone involved. And I think this is really where UX techniques come into it. So discovery is like a very well used word, and also workshopping and facilitation. Yeah. These are things that we see day to day. But as long as we really emphasize the value of those sessions, how they're organized, or our team are really focused on using collaborative whiteboards and to have like meetings that are super visual, mm-hmm. and ask structured questions, and we follow a process for sure, but the listening and the way we capture and record the outcome aligned with some sort of value prop or strategy statement. This is really, I think, why we find the techniques and the design world delivering these recipes or approaches super valuable for every project that we work on.
That's brilliant. And you mentioned obviously 2 key elements there, which is the people and their general attitude. And then you talked about the processes that you follow, because of course, without process, you end up with chaos. And then you kind of alluded to some tooling, because tools are the third essential ingredient to any service: people, tools, and processes. So what kind of tools are you using to bring this to life, to record things, to present things back?
Yeah, I mean, this is highly opinionated area, and the tools that we use, I think, are largely, or at least partly, influenced by the comfort or like the familiarity with them. Yeah. So, everything that we have in our tech stack or our tool set isn't necessarily the only way to do it. It's just the way that we're working. Yeah. So I think for the collaboration I mentioned, this is like we find Miro is super, it's like super valuable tool. We use it every day in almost every work stream.
And what does it do?
It's a whiteboard where you can collaborate online. It has a really good ecosystem for integrations. We're able to conduct those workshops and for everyone to take part either in real time or follow up later. Everything, is geared towards simplicity and ease of use. So this really, all those ingredients make it a really important component for how we conduct UX discovery and research.
Yeah.
I think the other tools that complement it are the ability to prototype. So it's not an immediate next step from discovery, of course, but at some point we would like to take our theory or to really put something in the hands of users before we go down the road of production development.
Yeah.
And so this is where prototyping is super important. And so things that we can do in Figma predominantly are really where we can get things answered and evaluate and pulse check those hunches before we have to spend too much time or effort and go down the rabbit hole of maybe something that's in the wrong direction.
I'd never thought about that, but of course it's like any product prototyping in the physical world. I'm going to design a new phone. I'm going to build a prototype. I'm going to come up with a new concept car. I'm going to build a prototype. It's one of those silly things I've never thought about in the software world. Of course you need to prototype it. Otherwise, how on earth are you going to illustrate some of the theory to the customer? So going from prototyping, we've talked about whiteboard collaborating. What else has you got in your kit bag of magic?
I guess if we think about the life cycle of a project, then at some point the planning needs to be represented in a project management tool. And I think we still rely upon Jira, which is very software project oriented. It's there and continues to be the champion for Scrum and Kanban. And it's super flexible. It's like, if you're not familiar with it, it can also be a disadvantage. I think it's sometimes criticized for its complexity.
Yeah.
But because we've used it for so long, it's still our go-to for how we convey roadmaps, how we capture backlogs. And so not all of our engagements are even following Scrum or Kanban these days, but the features, the taxonomy, we still use this tool in order just to provide that transparency and that accountability. And also it supports this ability to iterate and be flexible, this agile methodology. In a tool concept, context, that's where Jira comes in. And so there's far prettier tools out there now. And so I think there's
it seems everybody's doing it. Even Microsoft Planner has introduced the Kanban board and you can dice it up any way you want. But it's interesting how things have evolved around the world of agile. In the business world, we chuck the word around to try and make us sound as responsive as possible, despite the fact that we might be a Titanic of an organization, not be able to move. We're blessed at Distology to not be big and cumbersome, so we can stick to the agile concept. But of course, what you've been just describing there, I think is really interesting for a lot of our listeners. Now, I'm familiar with the world of product development, but I'm guessing a lot of people aren't. And you mentioned Kanban, you mentioned Scrum. For many people, Scrum is something that happens on a rugby league and rugby union pitch. So it'd be good to talk a little bit about what Scrum is. And the same thing with Kanban. Kanban is all about boards and planning. You talked about backlog. I think it would be good just to pause for a moment on the tooling and just talk a bit about those methodologies. And then I think you've got probably a good kind of 2023 view of whether people are following that in the purest sense, like they were years ago with the Scrum Alliance and other organizations, or whether things have changed slightly.
Yeah, I would say Scrum's definitely been there for as long as I've been working in IT. As long as I've been an engineer, then it's some degree process like Scrum or Kanban has always featured. And I think Scrum has definitely been the one that's been most prominent over the years. So I would say, and if you really are true to the Scrum Alliance view of what Scrum is, then there is a set of principles and techniques and like steps that you would follow, and to be truly compliant with the methodology, then you either have to do everything or you're not doing Scrum. That was for a long time the way in which people would approach it. You'd be measured your success in adopting Scrum would be measured against how well what your coverage was on the methodology itself.
Yeah.
So we even have been aiming to align with that over the years as well. And so this is every single part of the retros, the planning, and the way in which story points are done, and the way in which you score the points. All these techniques are in there.
So, and I remember years ago when I ran a product management team, sitting together with the Scrum cards. So I'm just going to describe the listeners. So you have a Scrum Master who replaces the project manager. Mm-hmm. You have a product owner that not replaces but forms the part of the the objective view of let's keep focused on the product. Then you have the Scrum team that's made up of a multidisciplinary set that are going to deliver all these actions. You generally use cards or some kind of system to score each task with a number of points based on effort and difficulty and intricacy and whatever it might be. And then you get together every single day in something we call a stand-up, which is great. I think you still use that today. In fact, I saw you doing that a couple of days ago. Stand-ups. Retrospective is something you do after a sprint has finished. A sprint is just a phase of the project where you say, we're going to deliver this set of things and we've scored them to know that we can get that done in time. And then you have the retrospective, which happens after the sprint finishes to just do a wash up before you then start the next sprint. And then, of course, you've got Kanban, which you described before, which is this simple concept of the most simplest concept of 3 columns: to do, doing, done. And of course, your backlog is the to do bit. What do we do next? Mm-hmm. And your Scrum teams and Scrum meetings are there to go and plan and do that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying is that you're perhaps not following it as religiously. In fact, not just you, but many are not following it as religiously as it was, because it became almost too rigid in its own concept. Have I described that well enough, do you think?
Yeah.
It's purist. If I went on the Scrum Alliance website, that's probably what I'd read to see how that's described.
Yeah, exactly. I think you describe it well. That is that are a lot of the key principles of Scrum. And I think in these days, I also believe there's a growing trend or opinion that, either you'll get some people saying Scrum is dead, or you'll see a bit more pragmatism with the approach, the adoption. Yeah. So, and this is where we're at with it. We're able to pick and choose the elements that really help us with the delivery. And most of the things you described there are retained. The sensible things, the ability to have a regular check-in, the ability to really loop in all the stakeholders frequently, and everyone has a voice and an ability to influence the outcome and really comprehend from a very early stage what we're aiming to do with everyone that's involved, not just the stakeholder talking to the designer, but the engineers would be in all of those conversations. This is all retained. So for me, it's not dead, but it's it's no longer super important to be completely aligned with it.
And I think you used 2 words which you said are very important, which you've said in the podcast and in our previous chats: empathy, which is continually understanding the point of view of the customer and what they're looking to achieve, and listening all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I think the trust and the success of our recent projects is based on empathy and comprehension of what that business or founder is aiming to do.
Because I think it's refreshing. It's refreshing because in the IT solutions world, often the customer is made to feel like they've got to have all the answers. There's a single workshop, which is delivered by some people that are probably sat in sales organizations, even if they're technical. They do a workshop. The product of that workshop is nearly always a product response. And we've listened to your needs, and these are the products you need to buy, and then we'll install them. Mm-hmm. And of course, what invariably happens is that there's some level of dissatisfaction down the line, because the customer is then told, that services element, you're going to need these people to help you install, configure, get this thing up and running. And of course, the customer is left at some level dissatisfied because they haven't got enough money to pay for that, because they haven't been talked about it. Your approach almost turns it into a much more organic thing, talks about what you want to achieve, and whether that's delivering a pure identity project that's focused on one of our core vendors, Okta, or whether it's designing and engineering a software product for a customer. you're listening and giving the customer the opportunity to talk about what they want. And I dare say you're probably achieving, is it fair to say you're achieving a higher level of satisfaction with the customers and the deliverable because of that approach?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you're sharing the responsibility of the objective, like by making sure that you're able to continually go back and like scrutinize whatever the objective was or the strategy at the outset.
Yeah.
This is way better than any waterfall method or, some way that you're siloing the customer from the delivery team. Yeah. So if you bring everyone together and embrace the change that can happen, which happens on every project I've ever been on. Yeah. There's no spec out there that matches the outcome down the line. Then you're in a very good path. If you have that trust and the confidence and the relationship, then you're able to handle change and really give everyone a voice to even encourage change to happen. Yeah. Then this is really something that we have a strong belief in.
Brilliant. And I'll say to all our listeners, if you're interested in the topic, and Martyn's just dropped another word in there, waterfall, which is the former concept of project approach, where you invent some idea and then you stick rigorously to that idea, which you never really talk about again, but then you just work for weeks and months in a linear format, trying to get from one thing to the next and hope that it's just going to work in the end. And also all I'll say to the listeners is if you're interested in that topic, there is a brilliant book called The Phoenix Project, which you can still buy on Amazon or get on your Kindle or wherever your favorite bookshop and learn about it. It's a fantastic novel that really describes this transformation from old style of linear project or waterfall project to this agile world that we've just talked about here. So I'm going to change gear a little bit here. After all, I did promise the listeners that we were going to talk about cybersecurity, but I think everyone will find the way in which we approach projects really fascinating. In our last episode, I welcomed the CEO of ThreatX, Gene, to come and talk to us about web application and API security. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to grill you on that because we've been there and done that. But I am seeing an increasing chitter-chatter and advertising around solutions that enhance security across the development world and across the multi-cloud landscape. And organizations, I'm just going to name a few, Wiz, who are well known and have exposed and are making a massive income from multi-cloud security. They've got a good alliance with a company called DAS, who are really enhancing the focus around code vulnerability. And then there's another one, Aqua Security, who really focus on the security of the developer and eliminating malicious code that might make it into the code that you're trying to push out into your products. Now, one thing that they all have in common is they have very, very large customers. Now, because I work a lot across the industry in the three regions that we work in and talk to lots of technology leaders, I know that actually the prevalent development partner is actually much more like you and your team here in Berlin. It's the boutiques that are able to be much more nimble and agile and focused on the deliverable. And so what I wanted to do is, rather than ask you to explain exactly how you're doing DevSecOps and how you're using these three tools, and I'm saying that with a smile on my face because, of course, again, it's another loaded question, because you're not a large organization. You don't have millions of pounds and hundreds of developers sat in an offshore facility giving you loads and loads. So what I wanted to do is to help make this concept, this whole subject, a bit more attainable for listeners, maybe other development agencies that are listening in interest, and talk about the real world. So when you're thinking about security, because of course you want your products to have a good high integrity for your customers, what's the reality? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think before we even get to those dedicated solutions that you've mentioned, I think it starts with really enforcing the message, or emphasizing the message rather, of best practice. And this very well established principle like OWASP would still remain as something that we would educate our engineering team on and make sure there's processes in place to reference and align with that during the build. So this, I think, to really embrace and be up to date with all the latest changes, because they do evolve it, and the last iteration does reflect current trends. And this is really, I still think, is a really good resource to start with. So this is open source, published on the internet, and really is a good starting point for any engineer or anyone who's taking care of the security on the delivery. I think also the architecture choices, your design, can really have an advantage when aligned with one of the large cloud providers. So, for example, if you're working on Amazon's, we often do on AWS, then you can get a benefit out of the box essentially by using something like the AWS CDK or anything really that gives you some bootstrapping and sort of provides all of the best practice through the maturity now of how to choose the right services, how to configure them. This can be like packaged in a sense. And so again, this is readily available. And I would say as much as possible, see where that can fit so that you're not experimenting or trying to work out exactly what your cloud infrastructure should be from scratch.
Yeah.
Going further forward, I think the processes in terms of the build can just take good scrutiny on your deployment pipelines, for example, in a way that allows for your peer reviews and also vulnerability analysis with, automated tools that will do some static and runtime analysis. This can all be done very easily, and it's all well documented. And I think as long as you're incorporating that into your project setup from the start, and then the team are really taking care of the reviews as we go, then these are all sort of standard and good principles to take on. And dedicated tools where it makes sense to do so. The benefit of an external or impartial view, such as like a pen test team, I think is also a really effective way just to shore up or raise your security posture, to have somebody, run a test and then act upon the results.
So I think that's far more accessible than feeling this pressure of having to buy whatever it is that's in the headlines because that's what somebody says is a good idea. And I think what I've learned working closely with you over the last several months is it's far more important to be principled. Principled is one thing. What I mean is to follow principles and design principles and security principles. And as you've rightly said, there's a lot available for any organization to keep aligned to what the best practices. And OWASP that you mentioned, which is the Open Web Application Security, I never remember what the P is, but you can look it up, OWASP, OWASP, and have a look at it and see what the recommendations are from that movement. So I hope you've all enjoyed listening to Martyn talk us through the design agency. If, like me, you've been enjoying the irritating Samsung noise in the background from someone upstairs, we're sorry. So Martyn, before I move on into my closing question, I'd just like to give you one opportunity just to talk about your approach to business, talking a bit about some of the things that are important to you, because I think otherwise what you've talked about is, I think, interesting, but every organization is an embodiment of their leader. And you've talked and emphasized listening and empathy. You can see the methodologies you're using, take those things, the tools you're using, help to bring that and illustrate it, and so on and so forth. But what are you looking to create? What have you created? What are you looking to extend from here, from what you've created as the nucleus here in Berlin?
Yeah, I have to say, I'm super proud of the team. It's a brilliant set of individuals to work with. And I think the commitment and the passion that we have here is super infectious. I'm really keen for that to continue and build upon these elements. These are softer skills. These are things that create the buzz in the office. The passion. There's, I would say, there's a lack of ego when it comes to technology, which is sometimes rare depending on the environment. So I'm glad that doesn't exist here, and it's really about the empowerment and the forum to cover anything that's of interest, and that can be in a product team context, but also just the broader context of living in Berlin and continuing some of the elements that brought me here in the first place. So the team that we have really do represent the city in itself, in my view. There's a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different interests, and they weave together for ultimately what our services model and team approach is. But, it's enriched by the individuals, the personalities, and the fact that we live in this city together.
And that's what we love about you. And everybody that we've spent time with, everyone you've met back in the UK and the Netherlands teams, everybody loves the people that you have. And I've got no doubt that engagement with customers isn't just about the methodologies and the tools and the way that you listen and demonstrate. It's actually just having good people. And you've attracted some really special, high-flying, well-known individuals that have joined the company because of the chance to join an environment. So I think there's a lot to be said about that, because development, I think, can be considered as quite a dark thing to go and do. I'm going to be shut in a room, windowless room, and I'm going to write, lines and lines of code. And I appreciate that probably can happen and does happen across the world. But what we've got here is something really special. It's been really great talking to you about it and spending a bit more time, our listeners understanding some of the design principles and the security and so on and so forth. So thank you. I'm going to end with my usual question, which I know you're particularly looking forward to. I can see the anticipation on your face. So what tech topic has tickled your taste buds this year? And are you going to delve into it? And why?
Yeah, I say there's a few, and with AI and ChatGPT in particular catching a lot of attention. I think that's an area of interest, and it's curiosity predominantly. But I would say leaning more into Web3 right now, just as a point of interest, and to see where that's taken us as a society, not necessarily how it will play into what we do in our industry. But I think this is, it's just a hugely interesting area. So Web3, and really in the context of identity, I think that as an individual, I'm interested in how this is going to play out.
Yeah.
It's very early stages, and the projections, I would say, are largely fairy tale, or they don't have any evidence to back them up. So that's why I think it's something that I would like to look at this year.
So I don't normally ask a following question, but I have absolutely no idea what Web3 is. So are you able and I'm just talking about just a super high level, what's it proposing to do?
Yeah, I would start by saying I'm not an expert either.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's why you're going to look into it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I don't, I don't own too much crypto, or I've not really too much knowledge on things like distributed ledgers that go in that area, or indeed the whole the NFT. I've seen owning Jack Dorsey's first tweet for however many $1 million.
Really?
Is all that.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
It's an interesting space, but the Web3 space is really all about decentralization.
Okay.
And so that's a massive shift in terms of what we would call Web 2 today.
Got it.
So it's really about moving where the data lives and who owns and accesses data back into the hands of those who represent it or own it. So that's
hence why you think identity's got a kind of a clinching point in that Web3 world.
Yeah. So where does it fit? I think it feels like it needs a solution in there. How does identity work in the decentralized landscape? And that is wide open. But I think it can be, if you think about Web 2 right now, essentially you're using single sign-on to sign into most services right now. So you're logging with Facebook or your corporate login, and then maybe on top of that, to verify your identity, it's typically ID proofing or video ident, where you show your passport on a live screen. So that's, I think, really sort of encompasses where we are right now. And this is evolved from the original username, password, and postal approach that we had. But if we think about where that can go, and there's no central repository for that data, and it's on demand that you're revealing or allowing that data to be used, then this is where Web3 comes to the table.
No wonder you're going to take a look at it.
Yeah. I think it's it will be it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And there's some things that catch my eye in terms of like your identifier itself. You know, I think you'll hear wallets being used a lot. You know, like everyone trading crypto will have a wallet, or like most of them have a wallet. Yeah. But if that same concept, if the same mechanisms can be used for your identity, so your identity lives in a decentralized fashion. It's stored in a database, which is what blockchain is. That's your storage. Your storage doesn't live with any single entity. Yeah. And then if you have a digital representation of your, like your ID, so your passport or your driving license, if there's a digital encrypted version of that, and then you package that together with your identity, and then those who want to access at the time that they need it will, result in a prompt that's similar to what you see in OpenID today, where, like an organization wants to know if you're over 18, for example, and you can say yes or no to that request.
That's fascinating.
And this is all really to do with the fact that the data can't be changed, you're in complete control of it, and most importantly, the privacy is assured.
Yeah. Well, everyone, that's a wrap, sadly, from here, this episode of Delve in Berlin. I'm Lance Williams, your host, and today we've been joined by Martyn Roberts, the Services Director for Distology and the team here in Berlin. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and obviously tell all your family and friends to do so as well. Thank you for listening, and come back and join us next time when we delve into our next topic.